Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Ghost, Skeleta. You know, for as broadly camp and ridiculous as Ghost has always been, especially in and around the metal scene, there was a time you could largely take them seriously in that space, and I don't put that down to the shift towards more pop structures on Prequel that caused this, which has absolutely buffed their sound to a mere sheen, but there was still enough of an edge in order to buy in. But as the spotlight and crossover potential grew larger and larger, especially going viral on TikTok, it was hard to get away from, well, just how silly it was getting, between the played out gimmick that only seemed to serve Tobias Forge's ego, production calling back to some of the dumbest years in metal, and the less we have to dignify some of the writing choices, the better. So I'll admit I had no high hopes for Skeleta, especially after the corny mess that was Impera that's aged rather badly, and that was probably the right approach, because this feels like an album that is one step forward, one step back. Nothing close to Ghost's peak and feeling all the more compromised for it. Maybe there is a way to meet it halfway, where Impera you couldn't, it felt seriously lacking, but that starts with the production, which is not close to the pummeling intensity of their best years, but it doesn't have the obvious missteps of Impera trying to sound like the absolute worst of 1990. This is closer to the glam metal of the late 70s to early to mid 80s, somewhere between Journey, Kiss, Motley Crue, maybe even the Scorpions, where the atmosphere is stripped down and starting to get almost quantized in order to accentuate a sharper, gleaming guitar tone, a lean bass line, and the occasional creaking bit of synth gloss that never quite saturates the mix or has the flair to amplify the atmosphere. Umbra gets somewhat close to some 80s theatrical goth in the vein of Sisters of Mercy, but this is no Floodland with Jim Steinman behind the boards. Any horns or attempts at a progressive flourish, they're gone, as is much of the crushing atmosphere, not helped by the drums sounding so underpowered, albeit competently mic'd this time. And when you have a band as theatrical as Ghost, losing some of that grandiosity only makes the illusion feel more paltry. You start wondering how much they were coasting on that atmosphere to compensate for so little menace that's translating when the melodies are so bright and major key, even if the guitar solos are plentiful and among Ghost's best. Like on Lachryma, Cenotaph, at least before they started blending in those chintzy synths, it works better on Umbra, Marks of the Evil One, maybe even Guiding Light. But the person who might actually look the worst here is Tobias Forge himself. As much as Ghost can kill it live and the overdubs that sound vaguely metallic are plentiful, the era of singers that they're trying to emulate could holler with sheer ragged firepower, and Forge's nasal posturing, even with the oddly metallic overdubs, cannot command mixes like this effectively. There's no grit or venom in what he's trying, and I couldn't help but think that if you switched him out for Weird Al Yankovic, there wouldn't be that much difference in the delivery. But that takes us to the songwriting. And look, by now you know the formula with Ghost, in the broad allusions to nightmarish historical themes, Peacefield probably being the strongest, referring to the fall of the Russian Empire and the rise of the Soviet Union, as it nakedly borrows Journey's chord progression, gestures at the corruption of religious figures, some sexualized imagery, try to highlight the seductive allure of Satanism. But man, 6 albums in, I can tell when someone's going through the motions rather than infusing these stories with any challenging depth. Thank God they stay away from current day politics like they tried with Impera, but these are all marks that Ghost has hit before and hit better. Where if there's something that might characterize this iteration of Papa Perpetua, it might be a vague reluctance, a corrupted church leader that's never quite willing to go for broke in the way they have in the past, or accentuate the very real vices that might drag them into the depths of hell. So in interviews, Forge has described this album going into darker and more personal subject matter, and okay, in the framing, if you have someone doing all this to themselves rather than some stock corrupting malevolence trying to get more personal, I might get it, but Satanized sounds like a parody of that process, and while Guiding Lights and Cenotaph show some of that internal journey, by the time we get to the bog standard Book of Revelation iconography of Marks of an Evil One, and the rather, let's say it, embarrassing sexual double entendres of Missilia Amori and Umbra, it's neither seductive nor scary, and even if that's intentionally the point to be that sleazy, I'm not hearing any sort of lyrical complexity to add more to it or comment on it. Hell, by Excelsis, we got a song about trying to make peace with the unknowns of death, and it breaks any immersion with their story with a sickening crack. So much of their storytelling has been built off of that inevitable hellish end, meeting Satan, and now you want to say you're afraid of it too, that there might be nothing down there? In what world does that work? At least Death Heaven was grounded in some level of reality when they hit much of the exact same closing arc, and that allows them to be actually imposing. And they're better writers to boot. And that leaves Ghost in a weird place. With an undercooked concept and less credible heaviness than ever, they needed the pop hooks to be top tier. And yet this is also the time where it seems like fewer risks were being taken in emulating older metal stylings. You know, exactly what Avantasia did earlier this year to painfully limited results when they had a working formula. So Skeleta winds up sounding like, well, a skeleton of Ghost as a whole. Bare bones that have some baseline of quality, but very little meat that would help them transcend. Fewer outright duds than Impera, probably places it a hair above it, but there's also no Watcher in the Sky, really any single song that would compete with their best. So if you like those vintage 80s metal hallmarks, you might probably like this, but as a longtime fan who should have really learned to expect less at this point, yeah, call it hit and miss. That next reinvention cannot happen fast enough. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Again, yeah, I know, my voice sounds pretty much shot. I tried recording this yesterday. I literally could not talk. In fact, I gotta do Billboard Breakdown tonight. Not exactly a good sign, but I'm making do. And hey, if you want to leave comments down there below from the diehard Ghost fans where you think this is at, I'd be genuinely curious. Apparently some new fans think they were always more of a comedic band, and that was never the case. Go back to Meliora, but again, I'm curious where folks fall on it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Yes, I know my throw will get better. I will sound better eventually. But if you want to help support the channel, get albums on my schedule, or hell, maybe just yell at me in my Discord, YouTube memberships and Patreon are right over there. Please don't feel obligated. Tough times, I get it, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.